The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
And welcome again, wrestling fans, to another episode of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jason Bryant, your host here with you, talking news, reviews, previews, and interviews. Today on the show, we are talking women and girls wrestling with Joan Fulp and Andrea Yamamoto of the USA Wrestling Girls High School Development Committee. It's a long name, but it's got an interesting theory behind it. It's about promoting girls wrestling at the high school level and beyond. First of all, welcome to the show, Joan and Andrea. Good to have you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So the name Joan Fulp might ring a bell to wrestling fans, as it's half of the last name from the sister duo formerly known as Sarah Fulp Allen and Catherine Fulp Allen. Joan, your late husband Lee was an Olympian, a coach, a trailblazer in coaching of both men's and women's wrestling. And before we get into what you guys are doing, I want to know a little bit about how the sport of wrestling found you, and now years later, you're leading a charge for girls high school wrestling.
Well, the sport of wrestling found me when I was coaching women's gymnastics at Central Michigan University, and the AAU had their summer junior world and world team camps at the university. I had left, semester was over, came back, and these guys had literally trashed my gymnastics room. All those Greco guys needed all the crash mats, and they needed the floor, and they needed everything, and I came back to run a series of girls gymnastics camps. So I had to have my equipment back. So it was a little bit of a tug of war there. And from my understanding from 3 or 4 coaches, they drew straws to see who was going to come in and talk to me and try to share the mats. And Lee drew the short straw. So the rest of it's kind of history. You know, we connected. And from there, I moved to California in 1978.
So he was coaching out in California and just happened to be at Central Michigan for this camp.
He was the senior world team coach at that time.
Okay.
So for 77, 78, 79, and then he was named the Olympic coach for 1980 for Greco-Roman. And at that time, they completed the quad, and it was head coach for all those world teams from 77 through 79, and then the Olympic coach, right? Yeah.
So we're going to fast forward now, and we're going to skip some of the details about. Okay, all of a sudden now you've got 2 girls, and you've got a wrestling coach for a father and a gymnastics coach for a mother. Where do you steer Sarah and Catherine at this point? I mean, how soon did wrestling really become an option?
You know, my daughters, everybody said they're going to be gymnasts, and I used to say maybe they'll play the violin. My husband Lee was such a low-key coach. Anybody that knew him would tell you that. And he would just take them up to the wrestling room. I think the first time Sarah was maybe 7, Catherine was maybe 4 or 5 and 8, somewhere in there. And Lee had actually run the first women's world team trials out of Vallejo, California. That's how we met Andrea at the time. And from there, he was already pushing girls wrestling because he was at Skyline College and had quite a few women at that time that wanted to wrestle. So he was already promoting the sport of women and still coaching the Skyline junior college team here in California, Northern California. And the girls just kind of drifted into it. I don't want to say drifted into it, because if they wanted to go, they went up to practice. Maybe they went, once every other week, and they'd swing on the ropes and play. And he just let them naturally gravitate to it. A little bit of competition here and there, because he was already pushing competition for the women at local high school, and then also with the senior women. So it was just like, if that was their choice and they wanted to do it, he was there. But he was never a guy that pushed them and said, you got to do this. So I remember Terry Steiner once made a comment that he felt that was why they have been in the sport for so long, because they didn't have anybody that just pushed and said, you've got to do this and this is your sport. He just let them choose.
Now, Joan, you set this up perfectly to bring Andrea into the discussion. Andrea Yamamoto, maiden name Andrea Karsten's multiple-time world teamer back in the early days of women's wrestling. Now, Andrea, what do you remember about those early camps? I mean, does Joan have the timeline right for you?
Yeah, no, she She has it perfectly. And in fact, I came into wrestling in high school at Richland High School in Washington in the mid 80s. And I think I got really, really lucky. I had an amazing coach with maybe just the passion or the vision to share wrestling with everyone that came through his wrestling room, including a girl. And because of that opportunity, he had a relationship with Lee and Joan and was able to contact me about going to this World Team Trials. I stayed at their house. He flew me down there. I stayed in Joan and Lee's house, and Catherine and Sarah were like toddler, and one is watching TV and the other is in a high chair at the table. And that experience literally changed the course and pathway of my life. I feel it's the defining moment in why I'm doing the work that I'm doing now. It's just a progression of that opportunity, and it's just a great moment for me, and everything from that moment really progressed forward with women's wrestling.
What do you think was the hardest part about wrestling? And you said you discovered it in high school, in the mid 80s. What was the hardest part about being a girl wrestler in that era?
I think the hardest part at that particular time was how vocal people were about their feelings about me being in their sport. This was also a time when we saw the rapid decline of collegiate men's wrestling programs. So it was a particularly difficult time for wrestling as a whole, and people were not shy about letting me know that they didn't appreciate my participation. But I think I always was able to realize that it wasn't really about me, and I needed to go ahead and just keep moving forward, as much, as I could. I didn't get hardly any matches in high school. Almost everyone forfeited to me. But I still loved the process of going in training and competition and preparing for competition, even if I may or may not get a match. I loved the lifestyle that our coach was sharing with us, and because of all that, I was able to take the opportunity, to go to World Team Trials and continue forward. So, along that way, there were people that came in and were very supportive. And those handful of supportive people can really push you along when you have a lot of voices telling you that you're not wanted and that you shouldn't be here. So
we circle back to what you two are doing now, the USA Wrestling Girls High School Development Committee. As Joan was talking to me before we actually started the episode, it had a couple different iterations of what the name was going to be. But Joan, what is it? When was it started? And what's the general mission of this group?
So Jason, probably a good 2 years ago now, or actually in 2015, we were working together. Terry Steiner had me on a few different committees promoting girls wrestling. And then we had the 2015 Worlds coming up in Vegas, kind of helped with that, pulling together alumni since I'd been working with the women for a long time. They pulled me in on that. And from there, Kira Berry, who was our women's team leader for 2016, said, we got to push the high school. We got to get the high school going. So Andrea and I both kind of said, hey, we can do that. We can start, pulling out information and kind of charting a pathway. So we kind of took off with that, and it's been a good 2 years, and we probably spent the first 6 months till about fall of 2016 talking, lots of hours, Jason, lots of conversations and thoughts as to what was happening, as well as pulling together numbers and stats and talking to different people. A gentleman that's in charge of wrestling in the state of Tennessee wrote a great letter about how they got started with just small numbers and sanctioned girls wrestling in Tennessee. We did a history on the 6 states and started pulling that together because we knew Akira had actually said USA Wrestling will put this on their website if you guys can, start pulling that together. So that's where we started working, and that was kind of our first goal, was to really crystallize some ideas and some thoughts and get those resources up. And that went up a year ago in April, so in 2017 or April 17, that got put up on the website. So from there, our mission truly is to support athletes, coaches, state athletic associations in the process of how to grow girls wrestling.
Now, not just for avoiding confusion, Sally Roberts has launched Wrestle Like a Girl, which your daughter Catherine has been a part of. This is not officially tied. You guys do work together on a couple things, but this is a completely separate entity.
It is. It is.
Which,
yes,
as you were briefing me beforehand, I'm looking at like this. That's a good thing because it's not just one little group doing it. It's two organized groups that have some synergy within, but working in different areas. So the focus on the high school, as you talked about with Kira Berry, Andrea, you coach high school girls a lot, and you've seen firsthand what wrestling can do and how well young women can excel at this sport and really become players on the national scene now that the WCWA is moving into its second decade. But when you look at the mission, Andrea, what makes you really want to get involved with this?
What gets me excited is that, number one, I really see girls fighting for our sport. I see them fighting to get on the mat. I see them fighting to build teams. I see them fighting to bring people in, getting people to coach them. I see them fighting for our sport, for these opportunities. And I am in a state that has sanctioned scholastic wrestling for girls. We have a girls division at our state tournament. We've enjoyed over 12 years of state championship. Every weekend, we can go to a girls tournament. In some areas, they are actually having duels. So, my state is a great example, along with the other 5 that have existed. There's such great examples of what's possible. We have such growing opportunities at the collegiate level. And so we need to start developing our scholastic girls programs in wrestling so that we can, be compatible with what boys have. So I'm just so motivated by what these passionate wrestling people are doing. I'm so impressed with the coaches, the parents, and also with some of the great leadership at some of these state athletic and activities associations. A lot of them that we've been interfacing with are really, really positive about trying to grow opportunities for girls. And when we're growing opportunities for girls in wrestling, we are growing opportunities for everyone. And so that vision that we've all had in wrestling, that our sport really is for everyone, we're really starting to see with the inclusion of girls, we're starting to see that vision become a reality. And we're starting to see all different, walks of life and people that I think our wrestling communities had a hard time reaching. I think we're starting to reach them through girls and women's wrestling. And it's just the expansion at the youth and high school level, the expansion at the collegiate level. It's just amazing. We are really growing our sport, and this is great. This is great work that Joan and I are doing, and it's great that we have the opportunity to be able to support all these people.
When we look at the foundation of teams and when they started, I remember this coming up will be my 20th summer going to Fargo for the cadet and junior nationals, and I remember I believe it was 2001 or 2002. I want to say early on. The year escapes me, but I remember freelancing for themat.com, and I did a story on Mary Kelly, who was at junior age wrestling against the boys. She had won a couple matches the year before at the cadets, including wrestling one of our Virginia kids, and he had to come back and win. He had to score late to win 8-7. As the first time I'd really seen a really high-level women's wrestler and sitting there beating the boys at the national championships. And then, I do a story on her, and then the next year going into her last year as junior eligible, it's the first year of girls wrestling out there in Fargo. And, here's me in my mind going, okay, well, this girl's going to walk through it. And a girl from California named Belinda Ripley beats her in the finals. And I tell the story a lot, unfortunately, for Mary's sake. But that really kind of opened my eyes that, okay, a girl I'd never heard of, and I followed wrestling pretty closely at the high school level, And you know, it showed me, one, the strength of girls wrestling nationwide, but two, Joan, you know this firsthand, how well California has competed at the age group levels, especially winning countless medals. They lead all the medal counts at the cadet and junior level with women's freestyle. And when we look at getting the states sanctioned, the first two, Hawaii and Texas, where was the battle for California for you firsthand, Joan?
Oh, Jason, that was a long battle. That was a long battle. You know, we talk about numbers, and one of the things that we just talked to the National Rules Committee, and we said, hey, you know, states are getting started with small numbers. You know, with 100, with 120, they're starting to take action to support the girls and provide championships. In California, they did not officially sanction the state tournament until 2011, and we were fighting that battle at least by 2000. And there were 1,900 girls wrestling in California when they finally sanctioned. When I tell that number to other states, to grassroots people, they just are like, they almost fall over because they think we'll never get there. You know, but I said, no, states are taking action now. They realize girls need to wrestle girls, and that's where we need to be. But it was just a battle. It was 2006 when they did officially run a North and South CIF, that's our state, California Interscholastic Federation championship. So they did put that in place. But we were already having, 16-person brackets in every weight, North and South. So there were a lot of girls wrestling in the state. It was new. It just took a long time. Washington came in, Andrea, 2007, right? So they beat us out on that with a lot less girls wrestling. Yeah. And
Andrea, what's interesting there too is it wasn't just shuttle off. Okay, you can have it. It's part of the MAC Classic, which people talk about wrestling in Washington, and it's like I've heard people tell me stories about they don't really follow wrestling a whole lot anymore, but they make a point to go to the MAC Classic every year. And for somebody who doesn't know what the MAC Classic is, Tacoma Dome, I mean, mats upon mats upon mats. Explain it for a first timer, and then explain it to what it meant to have the girls wrestling at the MAC Classic, which is the Washington State Championships.
Yeah, so MAC Classic, I really feel like the WIAA just made a decision that they were going to make their Scholastic State Tournament like a premier event. And so for every classification that we have, there's 4 mats down, so that we have 1AB, 2A, 3A, 4A, and girls division. 4 mats for each of those classifications are running simultaneously for Friday and Saturday. It really is such a great it's a great wrestling event. It's a great high school event. I really appreciate that the WIAA has run it the way that they have to really showcase our female and our male wrestlers in our state. And if you're a college recruiter, it's one you're going to want to go see. If you're just a fan of wrestling, you're going to want to go and watch these kids battle it out. They really have done an excellent job of putting on an exciting and respected wrestling tournament at the state level.
Now, I guess I'll keep this with Andrea for now. And in terms of styles of wrestling, the collegiate with the WCWA's freestyle, we have a good university age group system, and these teams are building in events like the Schultz, the Bill Farrell universities into their regular college schedules, in addition to their events at say Oklahoma City or Campbellsville or up in Canada at Simon Fraser. Folk style or freestyle, is that seem to be one of the biggest divides through this thing?
Well, Joan and I have actually been kind of discussing the fact that the formation of the WCWA and this rapid expansion of collegiate opportunities for women, they kind of had that visionary moment where it was like, well, what style are we going to choose? And, if you're looking at a complete wrestling pathway from youth through high school, through collegiate, and then the select few that want to go on and wrestle at the World Olympic level, that pathway would really be freestyle, and that is what they chose. And my understanding from conversations with Joan and others is that they fought really hard to have women's wrestling be freestyle. So now the question becomes, we have 6 states with sanctioned girls high school wrestling and folk style. We're adding several more have announced, Kansas and Georgia, and a third we think we'll be announcing very soon. So we have more states that are having girls state championships, and their numbers are going to grow in the next 5 to 10 years. You know, those states that are sanctioning girls wrestling, they haven't even gotten close to their growth potential yet. So and they will be in folk style. So we in this wrestling community get in this kind of face-off about folk style and freestyle. Well, scholastic and collegiate wrestling was built through boys and men's participation, and that process was streamlined with folk style. Well, the leadership at the women's collegiate level had the vision for it to be freestyle. Does that put us at odds with styles? Does that put the folk style people on one side and the freestyle people on the other? That's not really what we want. Joan and I have been looking for what would be the middle ground, what would be the most common sense, because really our scholastic institutions they're really not they're not feeder programs into college. You know, most of the kids that wrestle in our high school programs will never see a state tournament. Most of them aren't going to go and compete in college. They're there to learn and enjoy and compete in the sport of wrestling in a learning environment. So what do we do about the girls? Because now we have a bit of a pathway disruption. The boys don't have the pathway disruption. So what do we do as we're growing girls wrestling and we're adding more states with sanctioned wrestling? I think that there's the potential for some middle ground, and that could come in the form of some rules modifications. That would have to be a kind of an innovative and progressive and visionary group that would be willing to start pushing their state forward to be a little more in line with what the girls' opportunities are at the collegiate level. I think that it's not a discussion that people should be afraid of. It doesn't have to be this contentious debate between, freestyle and folk style. I think it's a conversation that we need to have, that we need to put out on the table. And I really think that there's just some common sense things that the state associations could do to make sure that the pathway for girls makes sense, and that it is one that is supportive of what their collegiate opportunities are, even though they realize the majority of the girls wrestling their state will not go on to compete in college.
Joan, as it relates to this discussion, it makes sense though that even if it's folk style, the opportunity is there to work with. Of course, this is the USAW Wrestling Committee to work with those state associations. And if you look where these girls' high school state tournaments have been put, I'm just looking at it. They're almost all in very organized USA Wrestling states. So, California brings huge numbers out to Fargo. And they're winning the junior, and they're winning the junior women's duels all the time. So that right there seems to be like that a potential gap bridger, so to speak. It's like, hey, well, you know what? We can work really closely with our women's leaders in our respective states to kind of make sure to maybe find that middle ground or that compromise or of sorts that Andrea's talking about.
Mm-hmm. So these are ideas, literally, Jason, that we have just been pulling together in the last 2 weeks almost, huh, Andrea? Just working with us.
So we're breaking the news. We're timely here. This is great.
Seriously, we had a state call, and they were doing a meeting, and they wanted some more information on it, because there are a lot of groups that are saying it's got to be freestyle, it's got to be freestyle. But we know, just like Andrea so well stated, these are scholastic programs that oversee, the sport of wrestling. And while some may try to look at, how do we go freestyle? I mean, New York City does a spring freestyle program for the girls. But they also have girls wrestling on boys teams in the winter, and they do blended teams in the winter. And that's New York City. It's not New York State. They're not moving that quickly yet. And Massachusetts, probably in 2013, tried to put in a spring season, and it just didn't go, a different season. So what we know is working is that with all the schools getting 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s until they can build a full team of girls wrestling, that they are going to be in that boys program, and they are going to be under that boys scholastic, association that each state runs. So we really realized, as Andrea said, the bulk of the girls are going to go through those programs, and they all want their state to run a girls' state championship. I mean, how exciting is that, to be like the boys in the state and have that opportunity to be a state champion. And right now, the girls' pathway is pretty challenging. They're on the boys' teams, and they may wrestle, they may not. Some definitely hold varsity positions, but then trying to go up through the qualifying system to be able to excel and be a state champion, that's a tough journey. So the states are realizing, hey, number one, and Andrea and I truly believe this, we need the girls off the boys' mats. And the other part of that is our young adolescent males should not have to wrestle girls. It's a two-way street. So we've really been, looking at that and pushing that premise that we also need to take care of our young adolescent males, because we know the girls that are wrestling. And Jason, if you have 200 girls in a state that's wrestling on a weekend, that's 400 young boys that are going to wrestle a girl, and they're not all losing. So we need to take a strong look at that. I love Ian McDonald, who's up in Canada. We talked probably a year and a half ago about their program. And when they started, they said, hey, we know the girls are going to be in practice with the boys, but we never envisioned mixed competition. We always knew the girls would have their own competition. And he said, we kind of looked down at the U.S. and went, what are you doing? I know Lee stated and wrote a wonderful article in the early 2000s that just said, the rest of the world kind of looks at us and says, what are you doing? With all these girls wrestling boys. And, truly girls, if they win, they can get some publicity. And, it's, for some of them, trying to go to the boys' state is a big goal. But in the long run, when we want to grow the sport for girls, we want to have successful programs, and we want those young ladies, once they enjoy the sport, we want them to return and be those coaches and be those officials at that high school level and move forward, into national competition if they choose. But we want them to be excited about the sport and have an equal opportunity to wrestle their own gender. That way, parents have less objections, and we certainly would have a lot more girls come out when they know they can wrestle their own gender. I mean, it takes, I know Sarah said years ago, for a young lady to put on that singlet, go to the center of the mat, shake hands, and then do combat with a male. That takes a unique personality, and it's really not what they want to do. They want to love this sport, and they want to compete in this sport without having to go head-to-head combat with, the opposite gender.
There have been situations, in the past, Deanna Ricks was in the state finals in Maine. Rachel Hale won a state title in Vermont. Michaela Hutchison up in Alaska was the first girl to win a high school state championship against the boys. I remember you've seen Helen Maroulas place against the boys, Nicole Woody. There's been those instances where those wrestlers placed at their boys' state tournaments, but that's not drawing girls out to wrestle. Okay, yes, the Superwoman does great, but that's the anomaly versus the norm. Andrea, has that been your experience in seeing your wrestlers come through in that fashion?
All the girls on my team, they're competing against girls every weekend, and then we are qualifying in for, our girls' state. But when I look at other states where I'm seeing girls take third place, take fourth place, they're qualifying for state, one of the things I notice is that it is at some of the lightest weight classes. So you might have, a third-year female wrestler. Maybe she's been wrestling since she's 7 years old, and she's still wrestling. She's more experienced, maybe, great strength training, doing all the things she's supposed to be doing as a junior, and she's wrestling that lowest weight class, and she might be wrestling someone who's, just started 2 years ago, a boy that in 3 years' time won't be at 100 pounds. So yes, we are going to see, and we have seen, girls that have been able to find a measure of success in a boys' state championship. But what we really want is we want for her to have the same opportunity for total success, which is to be a state champion. And the best way for her and all the other hundreds, and we hope thousands of girls that will be wrestling in their state, is that the most competitive pathway for them, the best way for them to have the most success, is to be competing against their own gender. So we're going to continue to see girls wrestling in boys state championship. Montana, I believe it was Montana, they actually had two girls. This is the first time this ever happened. They had two girls wrestle each other at the boys state championship, and I guess the crowd went wild. The crowd thought it was great. Everyone was really thought it was amazing. So it was a great moment of visibility for, these are amazing girls, and look at what they've done, and they're here competing, in our state championship. And there was another girl, Tylin Vasquez, that I believe placed fourth. So one of the things that happens is the girls are getting visibility at that state championship level. We want that to be a driver. We want people to see that, and we want them to say, what would it take to get more girls to start wrestling? And if we got more girls to start wrestling, we could just have them compete against each other instead of, having them go through our boys qualification process. So I think that event got people thinking. I think it got people talking. I think it got coaches talking. I think that there's some great people in the state of Montana that are starting to put their heads together, and they're starting to get organized and look at how can we create more opportunities for girls. But until each state grows and gets to the point where they can have their own girls state championship, we will continue to see girls make it into the boys state championship. Maya, I can't think of her last name all of a sudden, out of Colorado.
Maya Nelson.
Maya Nelson. If you look at her record at the boys state championship, she came in at one of the lower weight classes. I think she went 0-2 that first year. She grew a little. She starts becoming a more skilled wrestler. I think she went, 1-2 the next year, and I think 1-2 the year after that. She got bigger. It just gets tougher. And so, I look at her and I'm thinking, gosh, maybe her first year out, she would have been state champion if she were competing against girls. But these girls, this is part of the fight. These girls could just say to themselves, well, it's just not worth it. I'm just not going to do it. But I think what it boils down to for them, and I know this is what it boiled down to for me, I want to do this sport badly enough that I am not going to let competing against the boys stop me. This is what I want to do. This is my athletic dream. This is my athletic passion. If I have to wrestle boys, I'm going to do what I got to do. But we don't want that moving forward. We want to grow girls' opportunities. So that's not a decision that they have to make.
So I guess maybe a better way to even rephrase that question that led to it is, even though it's freestyle and we're talking senior level, when you're talking about girls wanting to be a state champion, seeing Helen Maroulis win a gold medal at the Olympics, beating another Olympic champion to do it, and probably one of the best wrestlers ever to walk the planet, that's more inspirational than say, hey, the girl from your local high school took 6th at the boys tournament.
Oh, for sure. I think. Yeah.
It's really. I realize that's a loaded scenario, but
one of the things we talked about when we put information out to states, and whether it's an executive director or grassroots, is visual. It's so important to provide female versus female competition. So even no matter how small the numbers might be at a tournament, we need coaches, we need parents, and we need those male wrestlers on a team to watch girls wrestling girls. We've just got to get that out. It can't be that phenomenon that we saw so often, especially early days and even now, where the girl beats the boy and there's all the publicity. We want those parents as coaches, we want them to see the excitement of girls wrestling girls. In Tennessee, I talked with their state executive director in January, And he said, when we have those girls wrestling at the state championship, because it's all, every division is there in one central location. He said, when the girls are wrestling, the crowd moves to that area. He said, it is amazing how exciting it is for the crowd to watch. And another great story that I heard from Tennessee was a school that had never had a wrestling champion. When they got their first state champion at that high school, it was a female. And that was the first champion in any sport that they'd had at that school. And he said, look what happened. It was so much pride and so much excitement. So we just have to get that out there. People have to see it and get away from the girl versus the boy, phenomenon and realize that girls wrestling is exciting. We've seen that grow all through, the years at our national level, how much excitement, is there when the females are wrestling each other. So visual is, critical, really important to push the sport.
I realize I've kind of buried the lead here as we talk about the point of this episode, and it is about sanctioning high school wrestling. So we've got the toolkit on themat.com, the women's wrestling resources. There's the sanctioning toolkit. There's the history of the programs. And so I guess step by step, what are the ways this organization, your group, is going through to sanction the high school wrestling at the girls level, and where do you reach out? Where do people reach out to you? Where's the step to say, hey, we've got 30 girls in our club, and we know there's another girls club 20 minutes down the road, they have 30 girls. To get, say, wrestling, Iowa's got a pretty good collection of girls high school wrestlers, yet they don't have it sanctioned yet. So maybe Iowa, insert state here. What is the process that you guys have been going through to get girls high school wrestling sanctioned, and what can people do to help?
Well, Andrea, both of us can jump in on this. We had 8 different recommendations that we have for states. And one way, they can contact us. Jason, we use Facebook a lot.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
That's how we set this interview up, in case you're wondering.
Right. If we see a state is moving forward, we just find out the key person there. So in a lot of states that are really trying to push girls wrestling, we have already reached out and found contact people and talk with them. We have committee recommendations. One thing we did, we created, Andrea put together a great survey, and we sent that out to all the state executive directors back in the fall through the NFHS. So with that information that came back to us, we have put together 8 recommendations that we feel are really important for states to use. And these are the tools that we try to give those grassroots committee as well as the state executive directors. And so it can come both ways. We found that if a state has a great person that's their wrestling liaison at the state level, that person can make a world of difference. And a lot of states, as we look at models of how to get girls wrestling going, when we look at those states that have a key person at the scholastic level working and ready to create, a girls advisory committee, or ready to help make some regulations that help the coaches realize girls can go to girls tournaments without, an event count against the boys team. So all those things are kind of critical key points. But we created these recommendations, and one of the biggest things is just encouraging states to start girls tournaments. If you have 30 girls show up at a tournament, a large boys tournament, match them up, pull them together, start a girls division at a boys tournament, start standalone tournaments, create an advisory committee to state level. And some states have done exhibition tournaments. Andrea, you might want to talk about that at the Washington level, but I might be kind of jumping off, the wrong side of the cliff there, Jason, but they can also contact us, whether it's Facebook or if they go to the website, there is a girls sanctioning email address that they can contact us at. Andrea, jump in. What have I missed on that?
Yeah. So, again, Joan and I, a big part of our mission is to make sure that everyone involved, whether you're on the state association side or whether you're maybe that parent or coach that wants to try to start getting something going. One of the things that's been really, that Joan and I have been doing is making sure they have all of the national information, like all of the NFHS statistics, all the USA Wrestling statistics on exactly how many girls are participating per state and nationwide in wrestling. giving them the histories of the 6 states that have sanctioned. I think it's really important to realize that when we talk about sanctioning high school girls wrestling, sanctioning is like a process that is used if, say, I want to add, in a state that doesn't have boys lacrosse, we want to add boys lacrosse. That is a sanctioning process. You are entering a brand new sport into your association system. But wrestling in almost all of the states already exists. It's already operating. We already have officials in place. And so we encourage people to look at it from the point of view of we're really asking for a division under an existing program. And so that changes kind of the attitude and the process and how people approach it. So getting information, correct information into people's hands is one thing that we do. The other thing that we do is if there's someone out there that is a prominent, person from that state and wants to support girls wrestling, we help connect that person with the grassroots people. I've put together a survey that was used in Utah recently. That's another type of service that we can provide. But it's really just about supporting those people with whatever they need to be successful. And we really want everyone to be successful. We want the association to be successful in championing opportunities for girls. And we want the grassroots people to be successful in championing these opportunities for girls. So we try to work with everyone, and we've had some great opportunities to do presentations with the NFHS recently that I think was a really, really positive way for us to connect with those executive directors. We have a lot of phone conversations with people on how to get started. We have a lot of phone conversations with people about where they are in the process. But, once these people get going and once they realize what their association needs to move forward, they're doing such a great job. And then we just we kind of watch and wait and see how it's going to go and what else they could need for us.
What's the key points? What are the things that your pitch points when talking about the benefits of women's wrestling, the relationship to getting them into college, and of course that ultimate goal of an Olympic medal?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think when we're talking to our young people, whether it's girls or boys, but definitely with our girls, I believe that wrestling is a transformative sport. I believe that it is a lifestyle. I believe that, if you want to excel at the highest levels of wrestling, whether that's your state, moving on to college, moving, into our USA wrestling system, one of the things I'm really glad about is that, we're doing a great job of making sure that we have opportunities through USA Wrestling, through clubs and our grassroots, and our Fargo women's teams are getting tougher and bigger. We have our 3 national tournaments. We really have expanded at the top. Collegiately, USA Wrestling. We've expanded a lot of opportunities. The key points being that, if you want to have a collegiate and a senior level pathway as a girl, now you have it. You've got to take advantage of all those opportunities. You've got to take advantage of what USA California or USA Washington or USA Montana has to offer you. Not only from a competitive standpoint, but the ability to connect and build relationships with other people is so important to moving forward through wrestling. And that just doesn't happen if you're just staying in your local space. Getting to wrestling camps, getting to a Wrestle Like a Girl camp, getting to, any kind of camp that's going to help you. And then making connections with collegiate coaches. I think a lot of the times I hear the girls feeling like, well, no one's recruited me yet. And I'm like, well, you don't have to wait to be recruited. contact the schools that you're interested in and start communicating with them. And then obviously, USA Wrestling puts together some phenomenal development camps throughout the year, and they open those to all cadet and junior level girls. Taking advantage of those opportunities to, be with Team USA, learn from Coach Steiner, learn from Emma Randall, learn from Clarissa Chun, and all the wonderful, amazing volunteers that they bring in. So, the key points are always the same. There are opportunities around you. You have to find them, and you've got to take them. And I think that we need to do a better job of making sure that girls understand what all the opportunities are. We have a lot of people out there that don't understand. We have 45 colleges and universities that are offering women's wrestling. They don't know that the NAIA has sanctioned. They don't know that there's an emerging sport application for women's wrestling in the NCAA. So we have some educating to do on our side. And you talked about Wrestle Like a Girl, which is such a phenomenal organization that has really, launched some visibility for girls wrestling. The NWCA is also doing a phenomenal job of talking more about women's wrestling. The National Wrestling Hall of Fame is also got very, very positive messages about women's wrestling. And then obviously USA Wrestling is, our national governing body taking a lead on growing opportunities for girls. So the key points are take those opportunities. You have to find them. If you don't know what the opportunities are, call USA Wrestling, and we'll be able to help you understand what's available to you as a girl wrestling and how you can get to the top.
Of course, on that page at themat.com in the women's wrestling section. The email, though, it's usawgirlssanctioning@gmail.com. That's a quick way to get a line to both of you about this. And Joan, as we wrap up here on this episode, a lot of things that are still in the works with this committee. What would you say is, I guess it's, again, kind of a loaded question, the immediate goal for 2018, 2019 in terms of numbers of states? I mean, do you guys have a number in mind? I mean, what are those goals for this committee?
You bet. Right now, we're just thrilled that Georgia and Oregon have voted in to hold that girls' state championship, that Colorado is in a 2-year pilot program, and they will also run a girls' state championship this next year. So we feel we have 3 states there. Where Kansas is moving through the process and got their first vote to push forward to the next step in June for another vote, and then into the fall. We have a lot of states that are moving forward. Missouri, we're waiting to hear from some votes and to see if they're going to possibly have a state championship. But we have Wisconsin in the process of moving forward proposals. We have Illinois doing a great job, Virginia, Minnesota's getting started, Wyoming, Utah, even Idaho are saying, hey, we're going to start running girls tournaments. So New York also is, in the process. We just have a lot of states where there are excited grassroots people just pushing forward and making sure girls have opportunities. It's hardly a day that goes by that you don't see some groups saying, like today, Indiana said, hey, last year we had 25 to maybe 29 girls at our freestyle stage. This year they're already at 40 pre-registered, and they were super excited. So, and the other part is to see the coaches who are finally having those girls on those teams get really excited about girls wrestling. Ones that just, before just kind of said, and then they get those girls that just want to wrestle, and they see that it's no different. Their love, their devotion, the excitement, and the opportunities. They just want to provide new opportunities for the girls. So these are all states that we're working with in some capacity, and really excited to see more states moving forward. But it's possible to even double our number this year. We're just waiting on some good votes coming through. So that's kind of where we are. That's the excitement, and we just keep moving forward and providing as many resources as we have the opportunity to pull together. And if a state needs something that we haven't worked on yet, just like the freestyle folk style today, we'll start working on some resources on it. Seriously, we just Monday night we kind of said, yes, let's let this first initial draft move forward. And, we kind of got our ideas pulled together. We kind of laughed, but hundreds of hours Andrea and I have spent in the last 2 years talking about how to move forward. And it's just exciting. It's fun. It's exciting. And we're just thrilled at all the great people in the U.S. that are starting to realize girls need to wrestle girls. It's time. It's time. We like to say, hey, the key to growing wrestling is standing right in front of you. It's her. And we've already had states tell us that now girls on boys' wrestling teams, their younger brothers are coming to the sport. So I always like to say, we hope that welcome mat to the wrestling room is visible and not kind of, over to the side. And we need to open that door and let those young ladies come in. But Andrea's right. We have a lot of education to do. We need a lot of coaches' education, and we need to educate, states and state associations to the fact that girls are ready to wrestle. Jason, they're already wrestling on teams. They're already on, competing for regional and state championships. It's not like they're a club sport. They're already holding varsity positions in every state in the U.S. So we just need to provide those new opportunities for more girls to step onto the mat.
Andrea, I'm going to wrap it up with you because, you went through this situation without this type of resource. You came through as a wrestler with, as you said, you didn't wrestle very many girls until you went to these camps. And then all of a sudden, okay, now I'm going to be wrestling in world championships not that long after that. When you look, when you look at the opportunities that are still growing for girls that love the sport, Terry Steiner says this is a great sport. I'm paraphrasing. Why do we wouldn't just limit it to half of the population? I believe something along those lines. But when you look at what you guys are doing, do you ever stop and get emotional realizing, wow, I wish I would have had that now that you are actually somebody that's leading a change for these girls that, to give them an opportunity that you had to really fight for?
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I look back on my high school experience with, great feelings. I had a great coach, got to be a part of a great team. I had great experiences, but I know that my experience and my success would have been drastically different had I had the opportunity to compete against girls. And so, Coach Steiner is right. Why wouldn't we want these girls on the team? And what Joan said is even happening in my wrestling room, where a couple of the girls on our team, their brothers, who never would have considered wrestling before, are actually now, turning out for our club program. And so, I really kind of feel like we're going to come full circle. We're going to become the inclusive sport that we were always wanting to be. Every once in a while, as Joan and I have gone along, and we meet people and we find out what they're doing, and we discover, in New Mexico, they did something phenomenal. They just basically surveyed all their coaches. How many girls do you have? Okay. What weight classes? Okay. Rank them by likability. And they actually, at their boys' state tournament, had a girls' tournament. And they had 8 weight classes and 8-man brackets. And these girls got to compete at state. So when we learn about stories like this and we see what people are doing, it really makes our work, we're just so proud and so appreciative to be able to support these people and make sure that one girl on the team becomes 5 girls on the team, becomes a full team, becomes a league, becomes a state championship. So I'm very appreciative to have the opportunity to do this kind of work. I'm very appreciative of and grateful for all the people that are helping Joan and I to become better in these roles that we volunteered for. And I am immensely excited about what is happening and the future of wrestling with the inclusion of women is looking really, really bright. I think our best days, we might be in them, and they're getting even better. So it's a really great time to be a part of this process. And I feel very fortunate that I'm able to be able to participate.
And to find out more about it, again, go to themat.com. Over the menu that says women, you can drop down. There's all sorts of things there. But right there in the menu, high school sanctioning resources. Of course, you can contact them via email, USAWgirlssanctioning@gmail.com. And I just want to thank you both. I love what you guys are doing. And, I've been an advocate for women's wrestling ever since, again, seeing Mary Kelly wrestle against the boys for the first time and, realize it's not just, it's not an anomaly. This is the regular thing. This is a norm. We're seeing it. I mean, one of the most proud achievements I've had as a PA announcer in the sport of wrestling was being able to say, "Please rise for the national anthem of the United States" when Helen Maroulis wins that gold medal. I'm crying my eyes out trying to keep it together. So it's powerful. It's emotional. It teaches everybody lessons, boys and girls. So, Joan and Andrea, I want to thank you for your time and thank you for reaching out, because this is a quality topic that I think needs to get out there. And I appreciate Joan, you reaching out directly, and Andrea, your knowledge as being a competitor and what it took back in the day and what you guys are doing to give back. So I know on behalf of the wrestling community, I appreciate your time and thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you.
You're
Jason.
very welcome. Thanks for having us. Thanks.
Wow, a lot of great things happening with women's wrestling out there. Thanks to Joan and Andrea for coming on the program and give us an update on this committee from USA Wrestling, and shows what we've got, all sorts of fronts battling to give girls more opportunities for women's wrestling. We've got Wrestle Like a Girl. We've got the high school committee here with USA Wrestling. Joan and Andrea really doing a tremendous job in getting our state associations to sanction women's wrestling. Matter of fact, as we release this on May the 24th, Arizona just announced that it was adding women's wrestling, girls wrestling as a sport. So that's another state that picked up that we actually didn't get to here as we recorded this initially around May the 4th. And there's been a lot of topics come up in between. We've had the Bella Glazov Camp Tour, which you heard on the most recent episode of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast with Nancy Schultz. Truman State situation, I'll get to that in a moment. We've also had, we're still battling Eastern Michigan things. And, I went down to World Team Trials and had a lot of fun announcing the event in Rochester. Now, before we get to the Truman State situation, I do want to point out that there was some Twitter chatter about women's wrestling from one of my favorite sparring partners, Ms. Nancy Hogshead Makar. And if you followed me on Twitter for a number of years, you know that me and her have sparred rather, when we get into it, we get into it. And she blocked me on Twitter a couple years ago, so we haven't had the opportunity to exchange pleasantries recently. But she did tweet something out the other day that was sent to me about giving credit to Wrestle Like a Girl, which it does deserve, but not giving any credit to USA Wrestling. And that is absolutely false, because USA Wrestling, if any organization has been beneficial to women's wrestling, it's been USA Wrestling. They're the one sanctioning the girls' tournaments, both folk style and freestyle. They're the one putting together the Olympic teams. To say USA Wrestling hasn't done anything to really spur high school women's wrestling, that would be absolutely false. Matter of fact, USA Wrestling has been one of the key organizations leading the charge with the Women's Collegiate Wrestling Association. So don't come at USA Wrestling. As I said, full disclosure, former employee, don't come at USA Wrestling and say they've sat on their hands since 2002. That's just absolutely false. But then again, these days we never let facts get in the way of a good narrative. I would be remiss to not mention the USGWA, which also did a lot for girls wrestling and getting the folk style national tournaments and things of that nature. So they also had done a great job in promoting women's wrestling. So it's not just USA Wrestling. That's the whole point. It's not just Wrestle Like a Girl. It's also USA Wrestling. It was groups like the USGWA years ago before it folded. But that's the point. It's more than just one front that's really fighting for women's wrestling. And to basically take a shot at USA Wrestling is disingenuous to the fight. So thank you very much. Moving to Truman State. Now, I had their athletic director, Jerry Walmering, on a couple weeks ago to talk about the drop. And again, I give him a lot of credit for coming on the program, because other people can basically ignore the media and say, we have nothing. Oh, we turned down your request, and fail to answer the hard questions. Yeah, we're looking at you, Scott Weatherby. We're looking at you, Eastern Michigan, who has continued to just look completely stupid in promoting their athletes and all of their great. The APR report came out yesterday. Yeah, let's promote all these athletes that we're getting rid of. I even saw a tweet yesterday. One of their athletes got a tweet saying, "Hey, you want to You want to talk about grad school? And it was sent to one of their athletes that they had just cut. Be like, why do I want to stay here? You don't want me here? Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to read this letter that was first posted. I first saw it on MissouriWrestling.com, and big props to Jonathan Dixon and the crew at MissouriWrestling.com, who's really been on top of this, and they've been kind of pushing this on social. They've been pushing this on the website. So this from Coach David Shooter, an email that was sent out to the Truman State Wrestling alumni and fans. I am just going to read it here. So before I do that, I'm going to take a big, deep breath and a gulp of water. Bad podcasting 101. Hold on, folks. All right, so I will follow up with the AD on their stance on this here in the coming weeks. But here we go. The letter, this was dated, let's see, Tuesday. That would be, 22nd. As most of you are aware, the Truman State administration announced several weeks ago that they will discontinue men's wrestling and tennis at the completion of the 2017-18 year. I've subsequently been able to meet with the president, who has agreed to allow the team to compete one more year with the caveat that we can raise $75,000 by October 18th. Let's remember that. $75,000, October 18th. Further, she has also agreed to allowing our team to compete after 2018-19 if we can raise an endowment by March of 2019 that can make Truman Wrestling self-sufficient. As you can imagine, I'm also disappointed in the way this decision was made. The university administrators are supposed to be stewards of the university on behalf of the alumni, students, and faculty. With this in mind, how does a decision like this be made without any transparency, collaboration, and inclusion with the key stakeholders? ? Absolutely. We're asking the same questions at Eastern Michigan. Now, continuing on with the letter. In tandem with the decision, I've been in contact with Mike Moyer, the executive director of the National Wrestling Coaches Association. Mike has been very successful over the past 19 years with establishing new college programs, adding 197 new teams since 2000. That number is actually well above 200 now. As well as saving threatened college programs, Mike is communicating with several lobbyists, lawyers, Truman State student government, and prominent politicians to develop a viable strategy to keep our wrestling program going. As Mike is developing a viable strategy, he needs to know how much in donations we can count on from Truman State alumni and friends for each of the next 5 years to support the wrestling program. Ideally, it would be terrific if we could raise $100,000 per year for each of the next 5 years, but not sure that's feasible given our alumni base. It will take more than just current TSU wrestling alumni and friends to get this accomplished. To be clear, we need solid 5-year pledges at this point as opposed to actual donations. Then Mike Moyer can successfully negotiate a partnership with the administration. Then we would need to actually collect the donations. In reality, the administration should meet the alumni halfway, $50,000 each, but that's reality. Please respond promptly to this email with a solid 5-year pledge so we can enter a good faith negotiation with Truman and their administrators. Please email pledges to David Shooter, wrestling coach at Shooter. That's SCHUTTER at Truman.edu. Thank you for your prompt consideration of this request. Please call me if you need any more details. And that's Coach Shooter. You can drop a donation in the mail to Truman State University Wrestling, care of Wrestling Office PB307, David Shooter, head wrestling coach. Or, as he's even said, if you don't want to trust the athletic department, send it directly to him, David E. Shooter, 2500 State Route P, or State Route, depending on your pronunciation, Kirksville, Missouri, 63501. Go to MissouriWrestling.com if you want to read all of that in detail. That being said, we're moving on. We've got a lot of good stuff here on the network, on the mat, releasing a show recently with Pat Popolizio. And, of course, we're going to work through with 5 Point Move. They're going to get some Greco-Roman World Team trials, World Teamers when they get their trials all done. Final X coming up in Lincoln, State College, and Bethlehem. I will be at all three. Information on those events at finalx.tv. You can get the matchups there. Flow Wrestling is also basically got most of your information there. You can find it on social, of course, matt.com as well. So, busy weekend. Voice stayed up, and we're having a good old time. So that's basically what I've got today. Last thing I'm going to say is I'm doing this research project right now where I'm trying to track down the hometowns and home states, and in some cases countries, of every single collegiate All-American. Now, I have to put a couple asterisks on that. One, I don't know if I have the junior college records or if there's going to be a way to even track down the junior colleges. But I am about, I don't even know, math. I've got about 500 names left, 560 names left on my NAIA project, which had 4,381 All-Americans to track down. Ed Ewalt, a retired wrestling coach out in Illinois, had these old binders, these mimeograph sheets, and picked them up from the Gable Museum a couple years ago, and they're stacked up. They're old blue, like the binders, the 3-ring binders have that like canvas type on it, and they got the purple and white sheets, mimeograph sheets. It's like he used to keep track of this stuff. So without Ed's work and his donation to the Hall, I wouldn't have been able to even start this project. So there's about 25 years I had to pick up at the end of his work, and then fact-checking and double-checking and pronunciations, cross-referencing results that didn't work with my initial list and with Amateur Wrestling News. It's just been a labor. So hopefully the NAI will be done by the end of the month. I'm taking some time away from putting out a ton of shows just to make sure that this historical research is done. I'm going to do that with Division II, Division III. I've already done it with Division I. And if you're interested in seeing that data, you can become a patron of the Matt Talk Podcast Network going to matttalkonline.com/contribute. If you hit the Patreon level and hit a certain level, you will get access to that digital sandbox. I have it on the Matt Talk Almanac page at almanac.matttalkonline.com. A lot of stuff there is free, like the Drop Project, but all this research that I'm doing and all the historical stuff and the stats and the lists, that's over at the Almanac. And if you want to get access to that sandbox, that's one of the perks of membership. So matttalkonline.com/contribute. Also, again, I'd like to thank Aaron Swayze. He gave me his vote is in. He says, I don't know. Actually, did he say draft glass? I don't know. I'm probably just going to go with a pint glass and change the color. Maybe go with the frosted white. So you get access to that. You get shirts, you get hats, you get stickers, for your support of this program. That's basically all I got today. Again, that's matttalkonline.com/contribute. If you want to go straight to the Patreon, matttalkonline.com/join the team. I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me. Women's wrestling is a quality thing to get behind. I mean, I'm a father of 2 girls. Whether they wrestle or not, that's their prerogative. But just a great sport, and it is one that 100% of the population should be able to enjoy and compete for a high school state championship. We're growing. Thanks to Joan and Andrea for their time and their understanding and their dedication to the sport of wrestling. I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me, because the Short Time Wrestling Podcast is proudly outfitted by Compound Clothing. Shirts, singlets, custom gear orders, everything you need. Call up Cliff and the crew at cmpteamwear.com. First time listening? Well, you can change that by going to matttalkonline.com/get-short-time to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or listen on your favorite podcatcher at matttalkonline.com/listen.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to matttalkonline.com.